Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John French. I'm the Director of University of Toronto Entrepreneurship. I would like to thank you for making some time in your busy schedules to join today's session. I know we all have a lot of options when it comes to what we look at our screens these days. And I promise that the next hour with our fantastic panel will definitely be worthwhile. In my role at UTE, I'm responsible for providing some connective tissue across all of the entrepreneurial programming that happens at U of T in Mississauga and Scarborough and at our St. George or downtown campus. Prior to joining the university, I spent about 10 years working for an organization called Next Canada, which supports young tech entrepreneurs from across the country. So I've had a lot of exposure to commercialization and innovation across the country. Before I hand things over to our panel to introduce themselves, I want to walk through a couple of quick slides and explain why today's subject of the discovery of insulin and its legacy is important to my portfolio and to UTE. Starting with the Banting Building. So this is where my office is. If you were to see just to the left of this photo, up until about 2 years ago was the best building, which is no longer there for very good reasons, which I will explain shortly. But the Banting Institute or the Banting Building is almost as old as the discovery of insulin itself. This building was built in 1930, and it really is one of the hubs for innovation and commercialization and entrepreneurial activity at the University of Toronto. All across 3 floors, there are 15,000 square feet of co-working and hot desk and event space. There are over 300 members, 50 plus startups, and a number of additional scale-up companies in the building. We host over 100 events every year in the RBC Innovation Hub. It's accessible to the entire U of T innovation ecosystem, and there are a number of other tenants in the building relevant to the topic of commercialization today, whether it's Obio, MyTax, Borealis AI, RBC's AI Research Lab, and it really is a hub for activity at the U of T. One of the initiatives that our office has launched in collaboration with a number of other parts of the university that I'm hoping might come up in today's conversation has to do with intellectual property and the idea of protecting IP rights and using them to commercialize for both economic and social benefit. And so for anybody who's watching today, there is a course that's available for all U of T students, alumni, faculty, researchers. It's delivered through Quercus, which is U of T's online education learning platform. And it's also available to those outside of the university and educators via Creative Commons license through OpenU Toronto and eCampus Ontario. It's designed for beginners or novices with no intellectual property education who are learning for the first time about the value in what they create, whether it be a patent or a trademark or a copyright. And that ecosystem, those engines of innovation that I spoke about, run from iCube, which is at U of T's Mississauga campus, to the Bridge and the Hub, which are in Scarborough, and then include about 8 campus-linked accelerators on the St. George campus, including the Hatchery in the engineering faculty, UTest, the University of Toronto Early Stage Technology Program, which has about 20 companies each year based exclusively on U of T IP, and among others, H2I, or the Health to Innovation Hub, which you're going to hear about a little bit during today's presentation from Paul Santer. And so if you believe that it starts with innovation, and insulin, and the legacy of that discovery goes all the way on through over 300 breakthroughs at the University of Toronto. There's a lot of reason for optimism after 100 years. And when we talk to our panelists today, obviously we'll be discussing diabetes research and insulin and breakthroughs and the legacy there. But we're also going to be talking about how the university ecosystem and those that are attached to it and around it can support commercialization of the research that comes out of our hospitals and universities. And then just to conclude, as I look forward, one of the reasons why we're excited, and to me this is the legacy of Banting and Best and the others that we're talking about today, is this new building. This is an artist rendering of where Banting is currently located at the intersection of College and University across the street from the Mars building in downtown Toronto. And BEST is no longer there because they're pouring concrete for the new Schwartz Reisman Innovation Center, which eventually across 2 phases will be 750,000 square feet of innovation space, labs, classrooms, co-working space for startups and scale-ups. The Vector Institute for AI Research will be located there. And so to me, as we talk about where we've come from and where we're going, the future is bright. And I'm very excited that we've got 3 really impressive panelists who will talk a little bit about commercialization, innovation, translation, and how it all fits together with this 100-year anniversary of the discovery of insulin. And so I've asked the 3 panelists, instead of me reading a bio off of a computer screen or a piece of paper, if they could each introduce themselves, highlighting what is relevant to the audience. And so I'm really thrilled to start with and welcome Dr. Daniel Drucker. Over to you, Dan.
Good afternoon, everybody, and I hope everyone's doing well. I'm an endocrinologist on the downtown campus, work at the Lunenfeld, and basically just try and figure out how gut hormones work. They control our metabolism, and it's led to a bunch of discoveries that supported drug development in the fields of diabetes, obesity, and gastrointestinal disorders.
Great, thank you. And next, Dr. Shana Kelly.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Shana Kelly. I'm a faculty member at the University of Toronto, based in the Faculty of Pharmacy, also a member of the Chemistry Department and Biochemistry Department and our Biomedical Engineering program. I run an interdisciplinary research group that focuses on the development of new diagnostic technologies and also platforms for drug discovery. We're very translational. I've been involved with inventions that have generated over 50 patents. I'm a co-founder of 4 different diagnostic companies, and I'm also the director of an initiative on campus at the University of Toronto called PRIME, which is focused on precision medicine, very broadly defined. It brings together over 70 of our faculty members, all united by their interest in research in drug discovery, diagnostic development, and disease biology.
Thank you, Shana. And last but not least, Dr. Paul Santer.
So I'm affiliated, I'm a biomedical engineer affiliated with the faculties of dentistry, engineering, and Tamarty Faculty of Medicine. My area of work is in the area of development of polymers that are control innate immunity so that we can use them to do to undertake something called tissue engineering, the building of brand new tissues to replace various types of organs. And particularly, we do a lot of work on vascular graft development. Through all that work over the past few years, we have patented several of our technologies, some over 70 different patents from around the world. That resulted in the formation of multiple companies, of which I'm the chief scientific officer for 2 of them, Interface Biologics and Ripple Therapeutics. We spun several others out of the lab with our trainees. And from all that experience, that has led me in the role of director for the Health Innovation Hub at the Tamarty Faculty of Medicine, an incubator designed focus on training our postdocs, our graduate students and undergrads, how to go about putting an early startup together and bringing the products to market.
Terrific. Thank you, Paul. And maybe we'll stay with you, if you don't mind, for kind of a high-level overview of some of the things that you're seeing inside the Faculty of Medicine and with some of the companies that you're working with in H2I. I mentioned the SHRIC, the Schwartz Reisman Innovation Center, which was the largest philanthropic gift the university had ever received until the very recent announcement of the naming and the gift from the Tamarty family. Can you talk about what that means going forward as it ties into to commercialization and what we're talking about today?
Yeah, I think that's a really nice pinnacle point of what's been happening on the ground here for both the past 2 decades. I mean, when I arrived here at the University of Toronto in 1993, I could count on my fingers the number of my colleagues who were who were building are involved with startup activities. By the time I took over Director of Biomedical Engineering in late 2000, I'd say 50% of our faculty of 40 had companies starting up. That was around the same time that the Mars facility, Medical and Related Sciences facility, was built right across the street from those amazing structures you've shown, formed in order to harness the capacity that existed here in terms of research and the potential. Very shortly after that, the campus-linked accelerators that you described started emerging out of the business school, out of arts and science, and in 2013, the Health Innovation Hub out of the Faculty of Medicine was initiated. And other big initiatives that have supported the translation in a gigantic way. Around 2014, Ted Rogers from Rogers Communication and their foundation invested $130 million into an effort on fixing broken hearts and bringing teams together. It was very fascinating to hear the story earlier on today from Gary Lewis on the importance of teams. And this Ted Rogers Center for Heart Research is exactly that, 10 very different scientists coming together to look at heart repair in a completely different way. And then slightly on the heels of that, Michael Sefton and Peter Zanstra and many others, including Shana Kelly here, led an initiative called Medicine by Design, which is a $114 million investment by the federal government to bring about innovations in molecular biology and regenerative medicine into the marketplace. And that's been very exciting. And then just recently in 2020, the Faculty of Medicine was the recipient of the Tamerty gift, $250 million, now a record philanthropic gift to a single departmental faculty unit on a campus in Canada. So large industry are coming into play, and we're hoping to capitalize on that through an initiative called Health Nexus, which is a call for about 130 million over the next 10 years to fill in a lot of gaps that exist in enabling the pathway to commercialization once it exits the lab. So there's a lot of excitement going on. There's going to be a lot of activity to rapidly fill up those new structures, and wish it could be around for the next 30 years even to see the transformation that's going to be happening here in the Toronto area.
Thank you. A fantastic overview of what is happening in the space at the university. And you mentioned medicine by design, and Shana, I know you're heavily involved with that. It's a pretty unique and special model. Can you talk a little bit more about medicine by design, and also just kind of what you see with regards to the mindset of researchers and students and those that are involved with that initiative?
Sure. So medicine by design, as Paul mentioned, was funding that came from the federal government through the CFREF program, which was really designed to promote excellence at our major research centers. And our effort is focused on regenerative medicine, but very broadly defined. I think it's been an outstanding way to bring people together from across campus and also from within our hospital corridor. It's a very collaborative program. It's all team-based science. That was already mentioned already in our panel, how important that is. Everything that happens within medicine by design it happens within an interdisciplinary team. It's biologists, it's chemists, it's engineers, it's all of these disciplines coming together to really work on the next set of breakthroughs to bring regenerative medicine approaches into the mainstream. I think it's had a tremendous effect on our research profile internationally. We've always been known as a center for regenerative medicine, but I think this has taken us to the next level. It's had a tremendous impact on our trainee base. The opportunity to collaborate and to become more and more interdisciplinary really prepares them well for their careers that they pursue after they leave us. And I think that's been tremendous. We're a little bit more than halfway through the program. And so we're just seeing some of the first breakthroughs and new technologies that have come out of medicine by design starting to go into companies and to really start creating that impact. So it's something that I have been really fortunate to be a part of, and I think the impact on the Toronto ecosystem and beyond will be very substantial.
Terrific, thank you. Daniel, you and your lab are globally recognized as a leader in diabetes research, particularly type 2. But what are some of the recent milestones, findings, discoveries that have come out of the lab, and what areas are you focusing on now? What are the challenges that lie ahead?
So one of the hormones that I've been working on, and Patricia Brubaker at the university for probably more than 3 decades, is called glucagon-like peptide 1. And analogs of this molecule have become widely used now in the diabetes space. The drug's also approved for obesity. And to our delight, it also reduces heart attacks, strokes, and cardiovascular death, which is a major problem in these people. So the industry now is saying, well, GLP-1 seems to be a good platform for treating diabetes and obesity. It's safe, it works well, it saves lives. If we want to make the next best drug, how do we add to GLP-1 with combination therapy, unimolecular, multi-agonists? And so, you know, our lab and others are basically trying to say, GLP-1 looks good. We've got 15% weight loss now with the newer GLP-1 drugs coming through. How can we make this better? And again, the gut is a source of a lot of hormones that normally work to control weight, and people are sort of sifting through these one by one to see which are the preferred partners for GLP-1.
Correct. And for those of you that are listening, feel free to chat, use the chat to share questions for the panel. I'll be monitoring that. I would like to stick with Daniel for my next question to start, but then open it up to the other 2 panelists. Daniel, you've got a lot of experience with regards to kind of taking the research and looking at the process of commercializing it, protecting the IP, making decisions, or looking at this decision whether something should be licensed or maybe it is a fit for a startup. Can you talk a little bit about that continuum and some of the decision points that are along the way?
Sure. So, you know, we heard already today, both in the previous sessions and already in our session, you know, not only is science a team sport, but commercialization is a team sport. It's a very complex process. The models, whether it's a small startup, a company, a licensing deal, you know, we need intellectual property folks, really smart lawyers, business development people. And then if you're going to go into manufacturing, that's a whole you know, different scale. So I think the key message is you can't do it by yourself. None of us has the training and the bandwidth and the smarts to do it. So we need to surround ourselves and assemble a team, and then ask ourselves, you know, who's the target audience? Is this really an improvement? Will people really pay for this? And what does the competitive landscape look like? And how should I finance this? What's the best model? And for each technology, I think the answer is going to be different. So there's a lot of homework that goes into trying to figure out what's the best way to move this forward to the marketplace.
Paul or Shana, would you like to add to that?
I'd like to let Shana go first there.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I completely agree that it depends on the technology, it depends on the discovery, what the best way is to roll it out. One of my mentors throughout my career has been David Walt, who's one of the founders of Illumina. And David told me when I was an assistant professor, Shana, nobody is going to care about your science as much as you do. So if you have something that you think is really important and it's commercializable, take it all the way. You know, get it out, get the tech transfer done, stay as involved as you can as long as you need to. And then when you have that, you know, great team there, Dan just mentioned, ready to really take the handoff and run the rest of the way with it, then you can go back to your academic lab. But it takes a lot of pushing and commitment and energy to get things out the door. I think it's wonderful when you get a phone call from the tech transfer office and they say, oh, somebody, you know, just popped in today and wants to license your patent, but that doesn't happen very often. It's a lot more, I think, investigator pushing, at least in Toronto, to get things out there, to get companies started, to get companies interested in engaging, and that's been my experience.
Yeah, and
Paul?
I'll say, so Shayna and Dan both did a really nice setup here on the importance of being passionate about it and building it yourself. And this is why the Health Innovation Hub actually teaches by case study. And the case study is your company when you walk in, and teaching you all the elements of that. We can put all kinds of people in seats and preach to them about intellectual property or a variety of things, and it's good first knowledge, but there's absolutely nothing better than being the entrepreneur yourself and driving it and being driven by that based on passion, as Shayna said, because there's all kinds of curveballs set to you. As a scientist, when we first started this with our first company, Interface Biologics, I was always of the opinion that the biggest company who has the biggest market share is your best first partner. But if they have the biggest market share, it also means that they have a product on the market that's already making a crap load of money for them. And for them to rejig their whole market machine around, that's a huge monumental push. So we learned very quickly the importance of finding the partners who is driven to be able to take your technology and drive it into the market, and those are often the people who are number 2 or 3 or even 4 and 5 in terms of market share down there, because they're looking at they're driven by the fact of being able to introduce the new product and to gain in market share. And unfortunately, you need those big partners who have the dollars to be able to invest within you. The other thing I learned is how challenging it is to set up clinical trials in this particular country. Interesting enough, we found with our companies now, we've coached about 250 companies, and it's so much easier to get your technologies in small community based hospitals as opposed to necessarily the big research hospitals. I can't quite figure this one out in the country. There doesn't seem to be a big reward system to engage in clinical trials in a big way in Canada. Nice examples is our very first technologies. Our first hospitals to use these interesting PIC catheters that we had developed were a little hospital in Saskatchewan, one in Halifax, and in Ottawa. And Ripple Therapeutics, which is the second company that we've just run out, we're doing the clinical trials in Australia just because Australia has set up an amazing incentive system to have its hospitals engaged in these processes. So there's all these things we think all the elements are all just sitting there in a line, but there's all these different curveballs that are set for you, and you got to figure them out in real time as you move along. And Canada, I think, as a country, is doing well. It's certainly a giant that has woken up. It is a very educated country. Lots of knowledge and intellectual property based here, and we're just beginning to mine it. And I think what's happening in Toronto here is a nice example of what a great mine could be. And we hope that we can continue to grow it and learn and teach each other how to do it faster and better.
Daniel, do you want to build onto that with regards to how Canada is doing, where we can do better, whether it's with regards to clinical trials or, Vivek Goel, Professor Goel spoke about the legacy of the Connaught lab and our ability to produce pharmaceuticals and vaccines in Canada in our current context.
Yeah. So I think when I said build a team, we often think of building a team means you go to somebody on the floor above you, or you go to somebody across the street. But building a team might mean that you talk to people in New York, Boston, San Francisco, London, and Beijing, and find the best people with the best resources, be that financial, intellectual, to help you accomplish what you want to accomplish. And I think, part of the challenge we have here is, and Paul mentioned this, so we're not always aligning our incentives with what we think our goals might be. So when it comes to getting clinical trials done downtown at big hospitals, we have a huge emphasis, appropriately so, on patient safety, but we never incentivize IRBs to get these protocols approved, to implement the trials, to get them done better and faster than anybody else. That's just not part of the mix. And so it really depends on where you place the incentives. And, you know, Canada, I think, has the intellectual talent that's second to none in regard to Harvard or San Francisco. We don't have the same pools of financial talent, and we don't have the same culture for fostering commercialization. It really varies tremendously. If you go to, you know, pharmacy or engineering, you probably have a huge amount of startup commercialization activity. Once you start getting into the clinical faculty, there's almost a disincentive. Be very careful. Don't talk to companies, et cetera. So we really have not aligned our incentives fully across the university to take advantage of the talent we have. It just takes time and it takes leadership.
And anything else to add for either university or hospital or policymakers that might be listening in on what we can do to improve the system?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've come a long way. When I first moved to Canada, this was 2007, a couple of years later, I wanted to start a company based on some diagnostic technology we had developed. And I called our tech transfer office and said, hey, I want to start a company. And they said, you want to do what? Why would you want to do that? And things are totally different now. And our ecosystem has come a long way. And I think the culture has even come a long way, but it still has a long way to go. But what we're still missing, I think, it's really the resources to start companies. It's hard to get a company off the ground in Canada and to find that seed capital or to find a grant to give you enough money just to do that first little bit so that you can then get investors in. And to me, that was one of the biggest shocks when I got to Canada after having done a company in the US, that there were just so few places to go. And early stage capital is hard to get everywhere, but it's really hard in an ecosystem where you don't have an SBIR program that you can go to really jumpstart something that you're trying to get out of the lab. So I think that's always been a gap, and it's still a gap. That's the one thing that I haven't really seen change. And I think we need to change. I mean, we're getting some great momentum. We've talked about all the exciting things that are happening, all of these philanthropic donations that are coming in that are going to allow us to do incredible research, but we've still got to figure out how to get it out there and how to build once and for all a really robust biotech ecosystem.
Yeah, on that last point, John, I think a very important element that has changed in the landscape in the past decade and a half is you had to go after venture capital to get even a million or two, and venture capital has now moved far away from those kinds of numbers. And the good news is that there's a big angel community. There's a lot of pent up money sitting in this country, and there seems to be individuals now who are coming in and who are a little bit more savvy on the healthcare sector and are interested in making those $1 and $2 million and $3 million initial funds to get those proof of concepts off the ground that Shayna is talking about, because those types of things are just not funded by our Tri-Council, our NSERC and our CIHR and our SHRC councils. And there is no other agency like the SBIR program that you talked about that's down the stage. There's no equivalent of that in this country. So we're going to be relying for a little while until those types of programs start on this this angel community getting going in the picture, and hopefully we can marry that to some of the great philanthropic vision that we have seen from the Rogers, the Tamratis, and individuals like that who actually want the commercialization element built into the research programs, and those things will help as well.
I find that either because of COVID or despite COVID, I'm still not sure which one it is, but there's been incredible momentum with a number of U of T startups securing funding, acquisitions, having exits. And when I look at most of them, they do have a connection to life sciences and health tech. Paul, through H2I and kind of your level 3, level 4 companies, are you seeing that kind of interest? And do you have any kind of examples of some of the startups that have gone through or going through H2I that are having really big impact in this space?
Yeah, so just to kind of enable the audience here to have a little bit of context of what John was meaning by level 3 and 4, the Health Innovation Hub actually runs this 4-level program, taking in students and trainees who know absolutely nothing about entrepreneurship and brings them along on this 10-point program, puts them almost on a conveyor belt and starts plugging business smarts to them as they move along. And so by the time they get to a level 3, they're in a monetizing phase. So the last year, the mid-level 3 and level 4 companies actually generated about $45 million in that economic value into the Toronto area here. So by that, I mean, there was about 39 of that was angel investment, about 5 million was sales of products and service, and about 1 million roughly of non-dilutive funding, which just emphasizes the point that Shana was making a minute ago about how little the amount is that's coming from the governmental component to support this translation side. In terms of exciting companies that are emerging, I mean, there are venture capital backstories. We have one of them, Ripple Therapeutics, in the middle of COVID-19 with not a single face-to-face meeting with venture capitalists is in the midst of closing a pretty major venture deal with a strategic from Europe, and that should be announced very shortly. Out of the Health Innovation Hub, this past year, we've had 3 or 4 companies that have done, you know, 2 to 3 million. Again, the Health Innovation Hub is focused on early startup. So by the time they move to the venture stage, where a 10 million, 15 million or so would be invested in them, they are going into other incubators, and they typically have their own advisory board supporting them. So a big deal for us is in the $2 to $3 million range. There's LSK, which is a very innovative sensor technology that has emerged out of the Faculty of Medicine and Keith Party's group that is now incubating both in Waterloo and within the Health Innovation Hub, that is turning some heads. Very cheap sensor technology that has been actually able to take advantage of the COVID-19 crisis and the urgency to develop rapid testing in those particular systems, as an example of what's emerging.
Fantastic. It's a long list. Shana or Daniel, any other startup companies, before we talk a little bit about industry partnerships and opportunities, any other companies that you're seeing in the ecosystem that you're really excited about?
I think there's a lot of activity within the research institutes, and we know Mars has some incubator space in the Johnson & Johnson group. And I think there's a lot, as Shanna said, a lot more going on now than 10 or 15 years ago. What some people don't remember, because maybe I'm a little older, is that 15 or 20 years ago, if you wanted to get $1 million or $2 million from the Ontario government, we had an Ontario Research and Development Challenge Fund that would match private sector money, and you could get $2, $3, $4, $5, $6 million matches, or a $500,000 match. NSERC had a huge matching program for commercialization 15 or 20 years ago. So surprisingly, you know, things are tougher now in terms of getting government leverage funding to match private sector dollars. And we need to have better conversations with government about their important roles in the equation.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, I think we're continuing to see mechanisms go away and nothing is replacing them. I mean, the NCE program was just shuttered, which was a really nice way to bring together academic and industry groups. And so the number of options is just narrowing, which is unfortunate. And at the same time, though, we've seen, the biggest IPOs in history in biotech from Canadian companies having happened over the last year. Some of the biggest acquisitions to have ever occurred have happened over the last year. So there's just no doubt that there's, a huge amount of energy and potential in the industry, but we have to find a way to do more bottom up. I mean, I think this is very much connected to the situation we find ourselves in with the vaccine, right? It's not just that we can't manufacture the vaccine in Canada, it's that we don't have that whole ecosystem there. We don't have biotech in Canada the way that it exists in the US and the UK and Germany and all these other places that we're seeing much better positioned that are going to get vaccinated much earlier than we are because we lack this. So I also wish that we were having more conversations with government about how can we have to do something different. We can't just kind of keep taking programs away and then just hope people will figure out some way to start companies and get the breakthroughs out there. I think we have to have some new, very creative mechanisms to take advantage of the fact that we do have a huge amount of momentum. And
there's nice examples. Just on that last point, as a nice concrete example, John, Canada more traditionally back 100 years ago when this great discovery was made was a raw materials supplier. Its mining community and its natural resources is amazing, and the Canadian government built a national railway to be able to move all those raw materials everywhere. Now, I would argue that a new raw material that has been created in this country is a very educated society, a very creative society. The number of intellectual property patents emerging out of our universities is skyrocketing. And it is time, on Shayna's point, it is time for the federal government to build the equivalent of the national railway to start to enable this technology to move not only across Canada, but to move around the world. And there's huge opportunity, and industry leaders are ready to stand up to do it. The Health Innovation Hub has 75 industry mentors, CEOs of corporations and whatnot, who are willing to sit down with the companies and coach them and mentor them along the way. So it really is time for the federal government to put into action, federal and provincial governments to put into action an innovation agenda with the infrastructure needed to complement what's going on the ground here. And there's huge opportunities here. The areas of diagnostics and sensors are undergoing amazing development. The combination of artificial intelligence and drug discovery is just unparalleled to other jurisdictions in the world. And the opportunities to develop and what's being developed in the services area based on the digital technologies coming out of our young startups is really amazing. But there is a need for that buoyed support to be able to move things onwards and out.
Daniel?
So John, if I could just pick up on 2 points. So one, I'll just follow right on what Paul said. So Paul basically talked about railroads, but we make much larger investments from the government side into the private sector in the auto industry and subsidize jobs in the auto industry to the tune of, well over billions of dollars a year in Ontario. But we don't make the same sort of huge investments in the private sector that would support commercialization in life sciences. And we're not, I think, second to MIT or Harvard or UCSF in terms of the talent that we have as outlined, but our taxation incentives in this country, to be controversial perhaps for a minute, are not as aligned with commercialization incentives as they might be in other jurisdictions. And we've seen the power of taxation incentives. There's a reason why Quebec for decades has been a much larger hub in terms of life science industry development, and a lot of it is tied to taxation at multiple levels. So Canada needs to realize that we are in a very competitive global landscape. And we need to align our incentives, not just on the education side, which we do a great job on, but on the commercial side, where I don't think we're always as competitive as our competitors.
And there's really good incentive when a country spends 10% of its national GDP on healthcare, putting aside all other sectors, clothing, food, oil, manufacturing, and whatnot. One single sector owning 10% of the national GDP. And when we look south of the border, if we want great opportunity to be able to make return on that manufacturing in the US, it's 20%. Take $5 out of your pocket and cut $1 away. That goes into healthcare services and products. So for Canada to not be there on an industrial level in the life sciences actually makes no financial sense at all.
And Daniel, I don't think it's a good panel if it's not a little bit controversial, and I don't think your comments are even that controversial in their nature. I think we should get our friends at the RSC to share a version of this video with some of the key decision makers at various levels of government. And so, having spoken about the public sector and government a little bit, what are some of the best practices and the things that you're seeing where industry is involved in commercialization of research in the healthcare sector, and how can industry do more? And I don't know if anybody wants to lead on that. That's an open one.
I'll just pick up on one of the points that I think Paul made a very important point about when you're deciding to, expand your commercialization vision, and who do you choose as a partner? And Paul said, I think very correctly, that it's not always the market leader and the biggest giant in the field that's your best partner, because very often, as Paul said, that person has already a large market to protect. And very often the largest partner in the space is the best partner that may just take what you've done, put it on the shelf and copy it, or simply take what you've done, put it on the shelf and never develop it. And so I think, when you enter into negotiations with partners, you need to be very careful about the types of contracts you enter into, and make sure there are clauses that allow the technology and the rights to come back to you if there's a failure to develop. Make sure there are clauses that deal with this competitive aspect in the space, et cetera. So I think there's a lot of thought that needs to go into partners. I think Canada has excellent sort of private sector partners in many of the life sciences spaces, but often the decisions are made not in Canada. Most of the head offices are not in Canada. So I think one really has to do a lot of due diligence. And just like you do when you do your own science, you need to say, what are the last 15 or 20 deals that this company has done in my space? What's happened to those deals? What happened to the inventors and the partners? And it takes as much effort to make commercialization successful on the business side as it does on the science side. And if you're not really interested in doing that, develop a team that will do that for you.
Shana?
Yeah, I would just add that picking a partner, it's like picking a romantic partner. I mean, you want to pick one that you really can see eye to eye with. And there are companies in the same exact space that operate completely differently. And there are some that will put terms in front of you that are really onerous and difficult to work with. And then there are others that really want to see the research get done and really want to see the breakthroughs get made. And they want to share in, whatever benefits come from that with you. So I think it always makes sense to look around, look broadly, look at lots of different potential partners. I completely agree that the biggest partner is not necessarily the best. You want your project to have attention and resources. And if it's the biggest partner, it's probably not going to get that. And it's all about relationships too. You have to find somebody within the scientific part of the organization that gets what you're doing. You have to find somebody within the business side of the organization that is really a champion, and that's what allows things to progress. So it's a lot of work. It's not something, again, like it's not that your phone is ringing off the hook if you have a bunch of patents and there's all these, partners just waiting to work with you. It's a lot about relationship building and finding the best partners, and then, you know, just trying to make as educated of a decision as you can about who to work with.
So I'll tackle your partners question from a different angle, and perhaps consider the partners for the ecosystem, to enable our ecosystem to grow and succeed and create the environment that teaches our young startups the types of things that both Shana and Daniel just mentioned here. You know, our government leaders need to be sitting down with companies like Rogers, Johnson & Johnson that set up JLabs in Mars, and Schwartz, Reisman, and ask these people, why were they compelled to make such significant investments in the technology sector, in a sector to grow, not only grow science, but enable science to move out of the lab and into the technology business sector? You know, what have they seen that our leaders are not seeing? And there could be a lot to be learned there, because there's been significant investment with JLabs. Has created little micro lab environments to allow these companies to solidify their intellectual property, get the proof of concepts out, and they're rolling investors in on a weekly basis to introduce and meet with these companies and help prime them and prep them going forward. The Ted Rogers, has invested in the ECHO program, which teaches young entrepreneurs and exposes them to successful entrepreneurs in order to expand their network. And Schwartz Reisman is building this amazing facility that is going to enable a lot of startups to get a foot off the ground at protected rent in protected rent environments, so that they can plow most of their money that they have into the advancement of the technologies. These people are visionaries. These organizations, these foundations have seen something that somehow our politicians can't see right now. And I think it would be great for the RSC, as you said, to be able to bring those two elements together and forge a partnership that changes the landscape forever in this country.
Well said. Well said. Another question for you, Paul, because we talked about the Insulin legacy and the Connaught Labs, and you're a recipient of the Connaught Award. Can you talk a little bit about that and how it's impacted kind of you personally, but also how it's had an impact on our ecosystem?
Yeah, I think it's an amazing story. You know, at the end of the day, I think the return on revenue on the Connaught endowment is somewhere between $1 and $2 million a year. I'm not sure, but the University of Toronto has pretty much split that up into initiatives that drive paradigm shifting ideas on the science side, but has taken the other half and has invested it in labs that are moving science and innovations out of the labs and producing minimal viable products and activities on the commercialization side. So that fund works on an annual basis for this community of 96,000 people. The vision that we have for a new initiative that is with the Advancement Office called Health Nexus is moving towards a goal of having somewhat of a 100 Connaught type companies at any point in time into the equilibrium system. And just imagine if Connaught produces $2 million a year as a result of benefits coming back to the University of Toronto through those very early days, that if you had 100 companies producing even at a 1 to 4% royalty return to the University of Toronto, imagine the impact and the legacy that would have on the system. So the drive to create these companies and have them exist in this ecosystem doesn't stop at the value of the product and the revenue for the company. It creates a company that needs to continue accessing innovative research tools, innovative minds, key opinion leaders, and they will stay here anchored in these ecosystems. They will continue to hire are what we call highly HQP, highly qualified professionals, and keep them here in Canada to be able to grow these companies and so on and forth. So the spin-off cycle is substantial. And for Connaught, you know, for me personally, it was a $30,000 award when I first got here, got my lab off the ground. You know, that lab subsequently went on to produce some 70 plus patents. I think we're, you know, our own research lab generated well over $50 million in our career time, and the companies that have spun out of there are pushing close to $100 million generated and spent in the ecosystem. So imagine that $30,000 small investment ultimately was the pathway to a legacy that hopefully we'll be able to give on its own back to the system. So the Connaught program is significant, and imagine what it would be like if we had 100 Connaught funds.
Well said. What an ROI on that initial gift, right? I'm conscious of time. We're starting to run out of time. Just a reminder for anybody that does have questions, throw them into the chat. I've got a couple more, and then we'll allow each of our panelists to make a bit of a closing comment, and I'll kind of guide them with a question or two. But at the University of Toronto, maybe this is for you again, Shana and Daniel. I believe the number is around 75% of research-based startups have a faculty-student collaboration involved with them. Why is that so important, and how can we facilitate more of that in the university ecosystem?
So I'll start. So, you know, in medicine, we have this very silly saying, which is see one, do one, teach one. And I think the same thing applies on the inventorship side. I have no doubt that people working with Dr. Kelly, who sees her passion for technology, startups, patents, etc., they're in that environment, and they're going to say, wow, I think I could learn how to do that. That seems really cool and exciting, and I'd like to do that myself. And so I think, you know, part of our obligation is to teach that culture to our trainees as young as possible. That's how I learned. I didn't know what a patent was in 1984 until I saw my notebooks disappear, and off went my supervisor into a meeting with some lawyers, et cetera. And then I said, I think I better learn about this. And today there's a much easier environment to teach. But I think, you know, one of the great things we have is that there's so many outstanding, bright trainees that come through our environment. We learn from them. They can pick up stuff from us. And that's how the next generation gets even better than what we're doing now.
Shana?
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, I would be surprised if the number that you cited was that high in the life sciences. It's hard in the life sciences to take a freshly minted PhD and have them take a company out and juggle all of the things that you need to juggle. I think it can be a little bit easier in other sectors, but we are starting to see it happen. And I think we've got to give huge credit to Paul's organization and our other campus-led accelerators that are teaching students, you know, just taking them through the paces. There's a lot to learn. It's very complicated. But our, you know, our trainees are the best equipped to take things forward. And that's what has to happen for our ecosystem to really rev up. I mean, I can only start so many companies at one time and be the CSO and try to, you know, do everything there, run my lab, do everything else. You really have to have this network of trainees that then, you know, run with things. And that's how the other big centers work. You know, in Boston, you know, Bob Langer is somebody who's probably started more companies than anybody else I know. He doesn't start them himself. He's not the CSO. He has an army of postdocs, an army of PhD students that then lead the charge and take things out. And that's how you really ramp up activity. And I'll just come back to the point that Paul made. I mean, this is really what we need to get things off the ground and take it to the next level, because in addition to having many, many more companies and, you know, revenue generation and all of this stuff, you know, the probability says that we will eventually have a Google, an Amazon, a Microsoft, you know, something that will fundamentally change the economic outlook for Toronto and Canada and jobs and all the rest. So I think the trainee part of it is incredibly important. We can't do what we all envision doing without having these mechanisms to empower the trainees to lead.
Paul, any final thoughts on that?
Yeah, the trainee pathway is critical for us to get it right. Statistic after statistic for the past decade and a half has shown that 80% of our graduate students will not pursue an academic path, and that's not because they don't believe it's important. They really value the education that they get at the University of Toronto. I've never met a graduate student that has not told me they have come here because of the depth of visionary thought and hypothesis thinking and strong research. However, they have come here. They are passionately in love with gaining that knowledge, but they have told me, firsthand, many of them, and again, statistic after statistic, tell us that 80% of our graduates want to go do this in industry. So for the University of Toronto to actually not be active in this area, to not actually be enabling programs like H2I and integrating translational thinking and opportunities and experiential learning on the entrepreneurial path in their programs is actually counterproductive to attracting the very best talent to this school, because stats tell us 80% of the most brilliant minds are coming to train at the University of Toronto and want to go the next step to being the next Shana Kelly, the Dan Drucker, in terms of moving their intellectual property out the door, but they're willing to do it in a slightly different way than they and I have done, not as an academic, but as perhaps in the early days, perhaps the CEO of that company, but what's vested in perhaps the VP of product development and so on and so forth. We have a young master's student who told me point blank when she finished her graduate studies that she wanted to go into industry, and she was the first lead product development lead for Interface Biologics. Today she is, after that company sold off their surface modification technology to Evonik, an multi-international, became the senior product development program manager here in Canada for this international firm, interacting with amazing research and product development centers in the biomaterials field internationally. So there's huge opportunities for these people, and if we train them right, they become strategic partners. They become the strategic link to partners for us to industry, and industry government funding programs, are going to be ever more important in the future. So it does us a service on so many fronts to be investing in that education component.
Fantastic. We are just about at time, but I want to give everyone a final 30 seconds. And in 2020, we can use optimism and positivity looking for the future. So in 30 seconds, as we celebrate this anniversary, what's one thing that you're looking forward to in the commercialization space? I'll start with you, Daniel.
Well, I'm going to change the message. So 2 messages. Listen to what Shana says about champions. Both you are the best champion of your own work, and make sure when you move to the commercialization side that there's somebody equally powerful as a champion. And my second message, which we haven't talked about today, it's okay to fail. It's okay to file a disclosure and not have a patent. It's okay to file a patent and abandon that patent. It's okay to raise a few $1,000,000 and then ultimately abandon the venture because it wasn't going as well. It's better to try and fail than never to try at all.
Fantastic. And if we're going to share this video, parts of it with have the RSC share with government stakeholders, I want to share that last part with the entrepreneurs that Paul and I in particular serve and support. Shana?
Yeah, these are great thoughts. It's been a great discussion. I'm very excited. I mean, I think we're building a lot of momentum, even through a really difficult time. And I think the message about risk is a really important one. We have to take risks as individuals to make an impact, try things that are really, never been tried before to see if we can have a breakthrough. But we also need our government to take more risks and support this type of, high risk, high reward type effort that, they have us to mobilize to make the breakthroughs. And so we need that support to be able to do it.
Paul, 30 seconds.
Yeah, I'm always glass half full. And so, while it took the example of insulin 100 years to spar our thirst for innovation translation, I look at the transformations in the past decade here in terms of new company startups and the value that they've created, and it's moving at warp speed compared to the speed that we heard the insulin happened in the earlier talks today. So I can only imagine that the timelines are going to be even more condensed for us to see even bigger successes emerge if we keep the course of action, keep the focus that we're on today. So.
And with that, a huge thank you to Daniel, Shana, and Paul for sharing their passion, their experience, their expertise with all of us. We say it at the end of every good panel, but we could honestly keep going and talking about this important subject. And so a genuine thank you. And also a thank you to the RSC for hosting and shining a light on this and other important leadership excellence examples during this week. For those of you that are watching, I've been asked to let you know that it's a 12-minute break now before the next session starts at 4 o'clock. And enjoy the rest of the day. And thanks again, everyone. All the best.
Thanks.
Sure.
Bye-bye. Thank you.